Assalamualaikum everyone, my name is Nitasha and we are in a new segment of Shaam Ki Chai called Chai Chats, where I of course interview Pakistanis doing really cool things, but we dive deep on a specific topic and we bring it to you. And today we have the amazing Sandalina Sattar with us. Hi.
Hi, thank you.
Of course, and she has been so gracious and allowed us to film this in her studio, which is incredible. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about other things, and we're just like excited to get started. So I'm going to start off by introducing Sandalina. You are a badass, I'm just going to say.
Thank you so much.
There is ex-Wall Street in your background. You run Spotlight with Sandalina. And so why don't you give me a little 2-minute intro on like, why'd you leave Wall Street?
Yeah.
What it's like to be a creator?
Yeah.
How are things going? What's up?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. By the way, I'm so flattered right off the bat. So I'm originally born and raised in the Bay Area,
Nice.
Silicon Valley specifically. So I went to community college for 2 years. Then I transferred out to the UC Berkeley School of Business, where I studied for 2 years. And then I graduated in 2022.
Okay.
And I started working immediately in M&A, specifically investment banking, Wall Street. I learned a lot. I was there for almost 2 years, but the reason I left ultimately was because I just realized the work-life balance wasn't something that I wanted in the long run. Culture, team dynamics, I just personally felt that it wasn't conducive to my professional development for what I'd envisioned for myself. And I just personally felt like there was more out there for me. I felt like a constant misfit the entire time I was there. I felt like I was pulling teeth just to make myself fit in.
Got it.
And I got to a point where I said, I believe there are other finance jobs in the world that are still intellectually stimulating,
right?
But maybe just like a little bit better of a work-life balance that I can also pursue my passions, which leads me to my show, Spotlight with Sandalina.
Amazing.
Very similar journey to you. I feel like I got to a point where I realized there are so many powerful stories in our community that are worth amplifying and sharing with the masses. And I think there are a lot of powerful lessons to be taken away from these individual stories.
Yeah.
So I started the show. It was just a brain cell idea, and then people started believing in it when I started talking about it and coming on, and everything's been so serendipitous and beautiful, alhamdulillah. I'm very grateful that it brought me to you too. So
that's
thanks
amazing.
for having
That's
me.
very sweet. That's very sweet, and that's an awesome journey. But we're going to be shifting topics a little bit, and we're going to be talking about something else. And we're going to be diving into toxic relationships in this Chai Chat. And it's a deep topic. It's a heavy topic. I feel like a lot of South Asian women have some experience with this topic.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to be just like unraveling it. So I want to start off by asking about how you saw relationships modeled growing up. And tell me a little bit more about that, and what are some toxic behaviors you learned as you observed relationships in our previous generation?
Yeah, it's hard. Before I start, I want to say I don't fault anybody for this. I think that there are cyclical dynamics, cross-generational, especially with the immigrant journey, that lend themselves to what we grew up seeing oftentimes in our households, in our neighbors' households. I think my view of love has been skewed from a very young age. I don't think I ever saw a good example of it. I saw great examples of familial love, right? The way my parents loved me was amazing. But I don't think I ever saw a healthy romantic love growing up, not just in my household, but even the households that I was kind of exposed to, the family friend dynamics. My perception's been, very skewed. I don't think I understood that love could mean peace, that it could be restful, that it could be something that brings you joy. I think I've always seen it as something that's a cause of anxiety, unrest, argument, yelling, swearing, breaking dishes. Like, that's what I thought love was for the longest time.
Wow.
I would see kind of fairy tale romances in TV, and I was like, well, that's for white people. That's not for brown people.
That's not brown people.
Like, we don't get that happy ending, because why would we, right?
Yeah.
So I think it was a lifelong journey of kind of unraveling that as time went on.
Yeah, so when did you notice that type of love was not really love, but just these toxic traits? When did that click? And how did that translate as you started looking for love as a young woman?
I think I always knew logically. I was like, this probably isn't right. But I didn't really understand what good was supposed to be. I think it was when I had my first experience in partnership. Right. When I was in high school, when I started symptomatically experiencing some of the similar behavior patterns that I'd kind of seen growing up. And I just remember thinking, this doesn't feel good. This really just doesn't feel good. I feel awful all the time. And I don't think I fully realized it then. I think it took going through it a second time later in college.
Okay.
To then see, this is a pattern of not good, and there are very similar sort of reactions that I have across these two situations, even though they're years apart.
Right.
Therapy. Then I started going to therapy, and that's when I realized, like, this is much bigger than me. Yeah.
So what were some traits, like, very specifically that you discovered in therapy that helped you identify love versus, like, a toxic or abusive behavior?
Yeah. I think ultimately the biggest thing I learned in therapy was that it's very important to listen to yourself and trust your gut. So when something doesn't feel good, listen to it. What I would do oftentimes, and I think a lot of Muslim women specifically do, is when you find someone that, aligns with your family in certain ways, you start attributing the importance of success to external factors that aren't necessarily between you and the partner, but it's between you and the community. Oh, this person's Muslim, so I have to make this work, right? Or this person gets along really well with my parents, so I have to make this work. What I realized is it's ultimately about you and your feeling, and it's also being able to use the word toxic and emotional abuse to describe the situation. I think for the longest time, I was defending my former partners because I would say to myself, they're really good people. I know where they're coming from. I know their heart. I know why they are the way they are. It took me years to just kind of say, this is what it actually is. And I'm happy to go into depth either way, by the way. But
I mean, I would love to unravel some of those traits, because I think it's really easy to just have this general conversation about like it felt toxic, but I'm sure a lot of Muslim women watching, or just any woman watching, like that is going through that feeling, is like, what is an example of a trait that you came across that you're like, oh, this is a bit toxic, right? Or what are examples that you've learned from research, perhaps, that do come up as, like, something that may be defined as emotional abuse?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what helped me really pinpoint it was therapy and reading articles online.
Okay.
I have a couple that I want to reference really quickly, if that's okay, because I think I'm not a trained professional, so I don't want to speak on behalf of one.
Right.
But, this is from the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So emotional abuse includes non-physical behaviors that are meant to control you, isolate you, or frighten you. This may present itself as threats, insults, constant monitoring, jealousy, manipulation, humiliation, intimidation, dismissiveness, and others. So these were some initial signs where I was like, okay, I kind of relate to a lot of these. And then there was this article by Women's Health, 24 Signs You're in a Toxic Relationship and Need to Let It Go. And there were quite a few that stuck out at me that I'd like to share, and happy to dive into. If you want to double click, I can anecdotally describe anything, whatever is helpful. Number one, your significant other is always finding something wrong with you. That was a big one. I felt like I was in situations where I was constantly being picked at, that, you're too much like this, you're too much like that, I wish you would be this way, I wish you would be that way. And it never felt constructive. It always felt like it was something meant to tear me down.
Put you down, yes. Criticize you.
Exactly. The next one that lends itself to the first one is they strip away your self-esteem, right? So they kind of pinpoint your insecurities and amplify that and use that to drill you down to the ground and break you into a million pieces to where you feel like you're nothing. And then reverse it and then build you back up
so they can tear you down.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. So I realized I was getting into these cycles where my self-esteem started becoming linked to the way that my partner viewed me by virtue of the fact that they were the ones controlling my perception of self. Right. There's a clear imbalance of power. I felt like I was constantly pining for somebody else's validation and approval. I was constantly apologizing. I was constantly changing myself. And I realized that I was living in fear of my partners. And that's not good.
That's not okay.
That's not good. Controlling excessive jealousy. I think, it's like, oh, why are you wearing this? Why are you wearing that? Why are you hanging out with that person? That. And I want to say, one thing I want to point out, the issue with toxic relationships is it's hard to identify them as toxic because you start mirroring that behavior.
Yes, you do.
Right? So this jealousy point, I started acting like that too. I'll be the first to say I'm very embarrassed of the way that I was in my past relationships. I was not a good partner either. But I think that you imitate kind of what you see. And that's why it's hard to pinpoint it, because it's a cause and effect relationship. Now it's pinpointing who's the cause and who's the effect. So that's one thing. The controlling and jealousy thing, it's not good. You're not practicing self-care. I stopped caring about myself. I stopped having ambitions. I stopped feeling like the need to, like, look nice or do anything. I had completely become a shell of a human. Even my friends, if anybody of them are watching, they can recall these times in my life. Whoa. It was not good.
Yeah.
Not good at all.
Yeah.
You keep waiting or hoping for them to change.
Yeah. Yeah. If I just do this one thing or I listen to this one thing, then everything will be different. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that. I have so many notes in my notes app and journal entries where I'm like, oh, like I know he'll get better. Yeah. I know this will get better.
Yeah.
It never does.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
Because it's not your job to like fix a person.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's hard to draw the line because a lot of people tell you, oh, you know, relationships require work, they require sacrifice and compromise. Yes, but there's healthy iterations of that versus unhealthy iterations of that. One, this is a good one. Your partner is constantly stonewalling you.
Oh,
so constantly pushing you out and saying, I don't want to talk about this. I don't care. Why do you care so much? Like I'm just shutting down.
Mm-hmm. It's not a big deal. Why are you making a big deal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Big one. Your friends and family are concerned.
Yes. Yes.
There were times where I remember my college girlfriends, high school girlfriends, parents just being like, something's very wrong.
Yeah.
And you need to tell us what. And I was like, no, everything's fine. I'm just going through a lot with school. I'm just stressing about jobs.
Yeah.
You feel worse when you're around them.
Yes. It's this feeling of,
this ball inside your stomach. You feel drained.
Yeah.
You shouldn't feel drained by love. There's moments that are hard, but it shouldn't be a constant pattern.
Yeah.
You don't have a positive feeling about the future. I remember sitting and crying to my partners at the time and going, I don't want my kids to see this.
Right.
I don't want my kids to see this because I know what it's like to grow up in a household where this is what you see and it really screws you up.
It messes you up.
And then suddenly you start empathizing with your parents. You suddenly start understanding them more than you ever wish you did because you're in that exact situation mirroring that same behavior.
Yeah.
And you don't feel good about it.
You're like, oh my God, yeah. Yeah.
This one, well, I already touched upon this, but you're always making excuses for them.
Yeah,
you're saying, oh, you know, they're you know, they're not that bad, they're not that this. But anyways, those are just a few from a couple articles that I thought were very relevant, and I think it's something that a lot of people probably listening and watching are feeling as we're talking about it. Acknowledge it, lean into it. If you can relate, there's a reason.
So thank you for sharing all that, and thank you for pulling up those articles. As someone that may be going through this, what are some concrete steps they can take in order to get themselves out of this situation? So one stat that I've always read, I don't know, I mean, I've read it, I'm sure it's true, is that it usually takes 7 tries before you can actually walk out of a toxic or abusive situation.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, it takes you 7 times of leaving and going back and leaving and going back before you can actually walk out. So that's
wow.
Yeah, you're like, oh, that's fucking my model.
That makes sense.
But would love to just hear about again, very practical steps that someone can take as they're watching this. Maybe they're identifying certain flags and stuff that they're seeing in their situation or how they're feeling. What should they do?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is having somebody that you can talk to. Now, this is hard because you don't want to overburden friends and family. This is something I definitely did that I fault myself for in the past, is I leaned on my friends too much when I should have been getting professional help. So maybe open up to a couple friends first to some degree. Have a barrier, healthy barrier, over which you don't, make it their whole life problem too.
Sure, yeah.
Get help. I think sitting down with a therapist, I remember emailing therapists when I was in my senior year of college. And I literally remember emailing, I was like, hi, I think I have a trauma bond with somebody and I don't know how to get out of it. I think it's unhealthy, but I don't know what to call it. And so you don't even have to go and say, oh, this is emotional abuse or toxic. It took me a year of therapy to say those words confidently.
It takes a long time.
Because I felt guilt and shame, and and also I as a side note, I'm somebody that has the opposite of victim complex. I never want to be the victim. It makes me feel icky.
Right.
So just doing that. So I think getting help. I think also just trying to have discussions with your partner to whatever extent it's possible in your relationship. In some relationships, it's not really an option. I recognize that. But see if they're feeling it too, right? See if this feeling is mutual, or if what the reaction is. It doesn't hurt. But ultimately, this is an individual journey, so this isn't something you can do with your partner, but it's okay to bring it to light and see if there's any room for like at least acknowledgement, maybe sometimes. Beyond that, go to therapy, get help. I honestly, really the biggest thing is just sort of having an escape plan. right?
Yes.
So you need to have a plan, even if you're not ready to call upon it. I remember for a long time in my trunk, I had all of my partner's belongings, and I was like, I'm ready to leave. Whenever the day comes, I'm ready to leave. I'm going to give these back so I never have to see this person again. I know it's more difficult in the context of marriage.
Marriage is difficult, yeah.
When there's you're intertwined financially, maybe
Yes.
like passports and stuff like that.
Yes.
So that's a different thing that I can't speak to at this point in my life, in my 20s.
Yeah.
But have an escape plan. When you're ready, you'll know. You'll know that you're ready. So whether it means like going to stay with a friend, right? Going back to your parents' home, right? Setting up a situation where you can maybe get a different job so you're not like financially tied to that person.
Yeah.
And taking baby steps to free yourself so that when you're emotionally ready to let go, you can. And I think ultimately, just be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Because like you said, with the statistic that blew my mind, it takes 7 times, right, on average.
7 times.
It's okay if you leave and you go back, you leave and you go back. That's part of the cycle. But just, I implore you to dare to believe that there's better for you out there. Just really have to believe. And of course, like for me, at the time where I was exiting the situation, I was moving to New York. So if there's a prospect of establishing a new routine and a new life unaffiliated with, this partner, I would definitely recommend that.
Yeah. Separate bank accounts is the other one.
Yes.
If your bank accounts are intertwined, then making sure they're separated. You have separate modes of transportation.
Yeah.
All of that is like super important.
Yeah.
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 Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course.
For sitting down with us. I know this was a quick deep dive, but it was super, super important, and you opened up so much about things that you may have gone through, and so I appreciate it, and I'm sure anyone watching that is experiencing this is going to appreciate it too. So
thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this.
Of course, of course.
It means a lot.
Yeah,
So thank you.
of course. And thank you guys for watching. I will be back with another Chai Chat. Until then, Allah Hafiz.